Welcome to another Art Lab screencast. This is the first lesson in hopefully what will become a long series of screencasts on the content management system Drupal. This is aimed at beginners who are new to Drupal and also new to kind of Web 2.0 development. So really, its intent is to hold you by the hand, really just get you going with the basics of starting a website, whether it be a single user website like a blog or a community website. If you've made it this far, I assume that you have an idea of what Drupal is designed to do. If not, I'll try to explain it as briefly as I can. It basically is software that you run on your web server that will allow you to create a website from the website itself. So you install it where you are going to host your web page, and what initially looks like an application eventually turns into a fully functional website, like the one that you're looking at right now, which is the Drupal.org homepage. So the first thing that brings me to is the Drupal.org homepage. This is where you can find everything from support to documentation to forums to downloads to contribute your own content back to the community, contact, and the community itself. So this is your first stop for resources for working with Drupal. There's also some other things. If you dig a little bit deeper, there's an IRC channel. Lullabot.com has some great audio podcasts and video screencasts. DrupalDojo.com has some really great kind of intermediate level to advanced level screencasts and collaboration type workshops online. There's also events that Drupal.org will put on, and there's lots of different ways for you to get involved. So the first step is to download the Drupal software. Now you want to check here often to make sure that you've got the current version, because Drupal is released in a rapid development cycle. So we'll download that right now. All right, and we'll take 5.1 and we'll save it. And we've got that. So we have Drupal. The next thing you'll want to do is make sure that you have configured a few things on your system. It's recommended practice that you develop on your local machine first before you deploy a website to the web. It just ensures that your production environment will be safe. You can make mistakes, you can relearn, you can start over, and nobody will see kind of a site that's being built. Nobody wants to see an under construction animated GIF these days. So it's best to work locally first and then upload your site when you have kind of your version 1 ready to go. To do that, you'll need a few technologies. If you're running Windows, I recommend that you download WAMP, which will install Windows. It won't install Windows, hopefully you're already running that. But for Windows, it will install Apache, which is a web server. It'll install PHP, which is needed to parse the files that Drupal is coded in. You'll also get SQLite Manager, which is a database administration utility. You'll also get MySQL, which is your database server. And you'll also get PHP MyAdmin, which is another MySQL administration utility. All right, and I'll just explain briefly what each of these do. So Apache will simulate running a website on your own machine. So by default, when you go to open an HTML document, it'll most likely open it up in your web browser on your machine, and that'll be fine. But if you go to open up anything else, like a PHP file or an ASP file or anything else like that, you'll need some server-side technology to be able to process those files to display them properly. So that brings me to the next thing which you need, which is PHP. All right, so since Drupal is encoded in PHP, it needs to be parsed to be able to be displayed correctly. So this is what this with Apache does. Apache acts as a web server, PHP will parse the files, and you'll actually view some files on your local hard drive in a web browser, and it'll display them different rather than just opening them. Right? If you just try to open a PHP file, you'll get a text document. All right. The next thing I'll talk about is MySQL, which is your database server. When you're running MySQL, it allows you to serve what's called a database. In your database, you'll have information about your content, your configuration settings, all of that stuff. So basically you have a set of PHP files, which is Drupal, and some other things, obviously. And that will then talk to your MySQL database, which you'll set up, and then it'll return values back to the PHP files, which will then get parsed and displayed via Apache in your web browser. So all this stuff kind of happens in the background. Right, to be able to even create a database, though, you need an administration utility. So that's what PHP MyAdmin will do. And we'll go through those. Now, you'll note that I'm on a Mac system, so we're not going to be going through WAMP server, but I felt that I should point it out, and you can get it at wampserver.com. And I felt I should point it out because the reality is the majority of the users of computers are using Windows machines. There's an alternative if you're using Linux, I should also mention, which is called LAMP, L-A-M-P. And if you're using a Linux machine, I'm going to assume that you know how to install something like this. Right, the next thing, if you're on the Mac, you come with, every Mac ships with Apache pre-installed. You just have to configure it. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to minimize Firefox for a second. Go to your Apple menu, go to System Preferences, then go to Sharing. All right, you'll want to make sure that you have personal web sharing turned on. If you don't, click the Start button right now. All right, after you've done that, you can X out of there, and we'll go back to Firefox. All right. And so once you have Apache running, then your web server is actually enabled. From here, you'll need to get a few things. So let's start with, actually, rather than starting with PHP MyAdmin, let's start with MySQL and the PHP parser. All right. So if you're on the Mac, I recommend that you start by going to entropy.ch. All right. This is the website of Mark Lineage. Apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. And what he's done is created some nice packaged installers for PHP. So if you click the Mac OS software category, all right, we'll wait for it to load a little bit. And then you can scroll down and download the PHP Apache module. All right. You want to make sure that it's compatible with the version of OS 10 that you're running. If you're running OS 10.4 or later, you want to get that. And the actual one that you want is actually the one that we were just looking at up here. So the PHP Apache module. All right. So I'm going to click on that. And we can scroll down a little bit. And you want to get the right build, okay? So if you're running one of the newer Intel machines, you'll be fine with this. If you're running OS 10.4 and you're on a PowerPC machine, you can get one of these as well. If you're running an older machine, make sure you grab these. And if you're on a really old machine, grab one of these, all right? And when you download it, I'll click this right here. It'll save it to disk. And I already have it installed, so I'm not going to finish downloading it. You'll double-click it to open it. And you'll double-click the file inside, which is an installer. And it'll install just like any other application. All right, so that's what's nice about that. Before this existed, you had to actually compile it in the Unix shell, which wasn't too difficult, but for beginning users, it's a little exciting, I guess. All right, if we go back, he also has a link on here to MySQL database server. Now, he initially wrote a similar package for this, which has now been taken over by the actual MySQL community. So if you click this link over here, and I'll just zoom in so you can see it, It's dev.mysql.com/downloads/mysql/4.1.html. If you click that link, it'll bring you to the actual MySQL community page. From here, you can download the MySQL Community Edition. All right, and you'll want to get the appropriate one. Again, if you're on Linux, you get the Linux build. We'll scroll down for OS X, which I believe is listed under Mac. Yep. All right, so we have Mac OS X, and you want to get the appropriate one. You know, again, if you have a PowerPC chip and it's 32-bit, you want to get that. If you have a PowerPC chip and it's 64-bit, you get that one. And if you're running an Intel Mac, you'll want to get the x86 build. For Drupal, I recommend using the standard build. All right, there's different flavors for each. It seems to work just fine for what you need it to do. All right, again, just like the PHP package, when you download that, you open it, and it brings you to an installer that looks just like any other application. Just go ahead and install it. And you'll also want to install, there's a couple other things that come with it. You'll also want to turn on, make sure you install the preference panel. All right, so down here you see, along with some other things that I've added to my system, you'll see a MySQL button. All right, by default, I have automatically start MySQL server on startup, so every time I turn on my machine, it's running. And that's where that's located. It's convenient to have that installed, and I recommend doing so. So once you have PHP and MySQL installed, the last thing that you need is PHP MyAdmin, which will allow you to create your database, which we'll use to run Drupal. All right. I recommend grabbing the latest stable version, which is usually indicated down here. You click download and it'll give you a package. Alright, just grab the one that's appropriate. So rather than the release candidate, which may not be stable, but most likely is, we can grab a smaller version, which would just be English, or you can grab all languages. You click that to download it. And it'll save it as a zip file. All right, when you download it, it'll be a folder. All right, you have to take that folder and put it somewhere. And that's also where we're going to put Drupal. So what you'll do is open up your Mac hard drive, or if you're on a Linux machine or a Windows machine, you'll put it in a corresponding appropriate folder that'll be designated by your LAMP or WAMP install. All right, on the Mac, you go to Library, Web Server, Documents. Now in it, I have several things in here. All right, so several projects that I'm working on. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call this Drupal Lessons. All right, so this is all the site that I'm going to build for all these lessons will go in here. I'm going to double click my original Drupal zip file, or tarball. I'll open it up, and I'll just grab all of the contents in it. And drop it in there. All right, so that's the first thing. So we have the files for Drupal in there. We don't have it installed yet, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Also, if you have PHP MyAdmin that you just downloaded, you'll do the same type of thing. You can actually just drop the entire folder in here, and you see that I have a build of PHP MyAdmin already in here with all the files intact. And that's all you have to do for that. I recommend renaming it to just something simple like PHP MyAdmin. Same thing with Drupal, rather than keeping the version number and all that stuff. It'll just make your life a little bit easier. The other thing I recommend doing is making a shortcut to this folder so you don't have to navigate your hard drive the whole time. So over here I've got a shortcut to it over right there. Next, what you're ready to do is configure your first database. So to get to it, and this is on any machine that you're using, you would type localhost, which will by default navigate to that folder. You can type /PHP MyAdmin. Now when you do that, you might notice the URL change. That's normal. And you'll be brought to a page that looks somewhat like this. Right? If you're working locally, it's probably okay to get this error message that says that your configuration file contains settings root with no password. If you are actually concerned about the security on your local machine, you'll want to go ahead and change that, and you can find the help documentation for that on the PHP MyAdmin site. All right. If you're working just locally, it's probably okay to leave it as root without a password. So for your databases, you'll have a list over here, and you can also create a new database. You can do that by typing it in here. So I'll type in Drupal lessons, and I'll leave it as collation, and choose create. Press continue. And we've created an empty database. Now with Drupal version 5, this is all we have to do in PHP MyAdmin, possibly ever. Alright, so it's one of the nice things about the new Drupal. So I'll now type in localhost /Drupal lessons, because that's the folder that I created. Alright, and you'll see that I'm getting an error message. Right, it says the following error must be resolved, and it says Drupal installer requires write permissions to the folder sites default settings.php. So what this means is you have to go and configure some file permissions. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll go back to my documents folder in my web server. We'll go to Drupal lessons. And we'll find that path. So it says sites default settings.php. And I'll right click on it and choose Get Info. To enable write access on the Mac, twirl down Details, and choose Read and Write. Read and Write. Should be similar on Windows. Now let's hit refresh. And we have the installer for Drupal. So we select the database type that we're using. In this case, we're using MySQL as opposed to MySQLite or Postgres. Database name will be Drupal lessons, because that's the name of the database that we just configured. Username is going to be root, and the password is set to none. And let's click Save Configuration. Right, and it says all necessary changes to site's default settings have been made, so you can remove the write permission. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm getting the good practice of doing so. Oops. Alright, so we'll set it back to read-only for everybody else. And now we can go to the new site. Here we've now installed Drupal. Alright, so now that we're in, we can begin to start to configure our website. Thanks for watching. This is kind of the end of this lesson, and this lesson is a little bit longer than how most of them will be. In the next lesson, we'll talk about how to actually begin to create content and kind of discuss some good practices if you're running a single user site. And so for our first project, we'll actually build a single user blog, more or less.